Inside this small and rather unassuming box are some minis that have been sent to me by one of my YouTube hobby heroes, and, well, to be honest, I'm fucking terrified of painting them. Let's go and take a look at them, and with some help from my friends, see if I can do them any justice. I'm Benji, and welcome to Benji's Hobbies. So as I said in the intro, I was sent these minis by a true Warhammer YouTube legend. When I got back into the hobby, I watched countless hours of battle reports from this guy, and his passion and enthusiasm for Warhammer 40k, in particular Astartes of the Chaos variety, was totally infectious. That man, of course, is Dave from MiniWargaming, who is not only a Warhammer YouTube legend, but is now also launching his very own range of minis from a universe called the Ravaged Star. And this first wave of minis are, as you'd expect from Dave, just a little bit chaotic. In a good way. It's not every day you receive an email from one of your YouTube hobby heroes asking you to paint their own range of models, so I jumped at the chance. I mean, when Dave calls, you answer, or at least respond to the email that he sends you. But it wasn't until I had them in my hand that it truly dawned on me exactly what I'd let myself in for. Even with a quick look over these minis, you'll see that they're bustling with detail. There's loads of ornate trim, some extravagant cloakage, and spikes and horns for days. Don't get me wrong, these minis are absolutely incredible, but with so much detail on them, I'm really worried I'm not going to be able to give them the paint job they deserve. Now, I'm going to let you guys in on a little secret about me. I'm not a particularly good painter. I know what I'm comfortable painting, and I know where my strengths lie, but when I saw these minis, they gave me pure anxiety. The stuff I normally paint isn't anywhere near this intricate, or has this much trim and detail, so in all honesty, I didn't really know where to start. So what I did was ask some of the best painters on YouTube for some sage advice.
What's Ben want? He's asking me on painting tips on how to paint models.
What's he asked you for?
There's so much detail on these. Here, check them out.
Oh, yeah. Oh, there's loads of detail on them. I'd just say keep it simple. You put too many colours on that and it's going to look way too busy. Loads of detail. So just pick a few colours.
I'd just wash and dry brush them. I can't even see half of that detail. Lovely models though. Dave's done a great job on them.
Who's she?
Hey Benji, it's Brushstroke. So my tip for painting models with lots of intricate tiny detail is to keep your base coats really clean and smooth, because if you have to paint a smooth coat, you need to do it as a thin layer, and thin layers means you won't obscure any detail. So just remember to add that little bit of water to help the paint flow cleanly and smoothly from the brush. And don't forget that a good paint job starts with a good base coat. Another great tip to help you see those details in the first place is if you prime your model using a zenithal prime. That way it really helps bring out those details and makes the job a lot easier to paint them in. I hope that helps, and let me know how you get on.
Hi Benji, I'm Spencer from Spence Painting, and I've heard that you want to paint a model with streak and grime. I think this is a great idea. The best way to do this is to coat the whole model with the streak and grime, then take a cotton bud soaked in enamel thinner, roll this across the model. This will reduce the grime down. Then take another clean cotton bud, again roll it across the model. This will mop up any excess that's left on there and leave you with a nice grimy residue. I hope you enjoy. See ya!
Oh, and of course, I couldn't paint them without some advice from the King of Chaos himself.
Benji, my advice for painting these models? Blood. Include lots of blood. Kill, maim, bird, blood. Bloody, burn, fire, burn, skulls, blood, all day long. As long as it's gore-soaked, I'll be happy.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dave. That was in no way a little bit scary at all. So anyway, with some key bits of painting advice to focus on, I started painting the minis and opted to go for a Death Guard-esque scheme. Taking the first piece of advice from Brushstroke, I started by priming the models in black, and then gave them a zenithal prime with white ink. This will definitely help with some of the next steps on this project, and make it a little bit easier for you to see on camera as well. I wanted to keep my paint scheme as simple as possible following Josh's advice, so picked out my main colour for the model and chose a limited colour palette to paint in the rest of the model. With such busy models, it's tempting to go overboard with colours, but keeping it simple will make them look a lot more cohesive and give a better end result. I started by painting the armour with a Plaguebearer Flesh contrast paint to give me a nice even colour to work off. I've become a big fan of using contrast paints to paint the larger areas on minis, followed by the more traditional paints, wash and highlight on smaller areas afterwards. It means I don't have to be too careful with where I'm placing the contrast, and gives me plenty of time to play with it and stop it from pooling on the flatter surfaces. Contrast combined with the zenithal highlight works so well, leaving the recesses dark and means I shouldn't need to do too much highlighting, so it saves a bit of time and effort later in the process. Once the contrast was dry, I started carefully blocking in the rest of the model. I opted to go for a traditional Death Guard-esque colour for the cloth areas, using Screamer Pink on all the robes and cloaks. I tend not to work to any colour theory as such, because I just tend to wing it and put down colours that I think look good together, but the green base colour and pinkish purple are complementary colours and make for a nice contrast on these minis. I then painted in all the leather areas, chains, gun casings and so on across all of the minis. Whilst this was by far the most time consuming step, I really wanted to make sure I took my time on the base coats. Firstly, so as not to ruin the contrast paintwork underneath, but also I knew it would pay dividends at the end. I followed Brushstroke's advice while painting all of these areas, making sure to thin my paints appropriately on my wet palette so as not to obscure any detail with a thick paint. The final detail work needed on these models was the crazy amount of ornate trim around the armour, which I picked out very slowly with Retributor Gold. As this was the last step, I didn't want to mess up at this late stage, so I took this super slowly and methodically, working my way around the entirety of the miniatures. With everything painted up to their base coats, these dudes are looking just a bit bright and clean, and definitely need a bit of griming up to look more like Death Guard. So next, I took Spencer's advice and used streak and grime to really dirty them up. Whilst you can apply this with an airbrush, I just used a normal synthetic brush to give me a solid covering and used a hairdryer to help it dry a little quicker. Whilst they did look like a dirty, gooey mess, this is all part of the plan and the beauty of streak and grime. Once it's somewhat dry, you can use a paint stripper, in my case Artist's White Spirit, to knock it back and clean the model up using a cotton bud to remove the excess, just leaving the streak and grime in the recesses. I've watched Spence using streak and grime in loads of his videos, but this was my first time really putting it through its paces, and I'm so surprised at how easy it was. I think this just might become an addictive way for me to paint armies quickly in the future. I'd highly recommend going and checking out some of his videos if this sort of painting interests you. Finally, to keep Dave happy, I used some Army Painter glistening blood effect paint on the head of the axe and used an old plastic brush to splatter some blood on the models. I wanted these guys to look like they'd been absolutely devastating their opponents on the battlefield, so some light splashes of blood and gore really help add to the effect. So that's it. I'm really pleased with how these models have turned out. Using some really basic yet solid advice and tips from other painters, I managed to simplify the painting process on these otherwise fairly complex and detailed models and come out with a result that I'm really happy with, despite my very average painting skills. Dave has done a fantastic job of designing them, and I love the chaotic influences that are plain to see on these minis. I've included all the relevant links to Ravaged Star down below, so make sure you go and check them out. I'm really excited to see what the future has in store for this franchise. A big shout out to Josh from The Pickle Jar, James from Brushstroke, and Spence from Spence Painting for their words of wisdom and advice for getting these models painted. Be sure to go and check out their channels, which I've also linked down below, and also a huge thanks to Dave for sending these minis out to me. As always, go and do all the liking, sharing, subscribing, and check out my affiliates and Patreon and all that down below, and I hope to see you guys in the next video.